Start with the silence that shouldn't have been silent at all. In the first hours after midnight, when the control rooms warmed themselves with coffee and low light, the Solar Dynamics Observatory shoved a new clip into the stream. No music. No warning. Just the sun doing something it had no business doing 3 times in a row. A filament unspooled like a rope cut free of its cleat. A prominence rose with the arrogance of a mountain growing in fast forward. Magnetic loops bent and then snapped as if an invisible hand had found the hidden latch and clicked it on purpose. One event would have been spectacle. 3 separate events, overlapping in less than 48 hours and all within the same region of the star, mocked our forecasts, our models and our confidence. We would have filed it under August theatrics, and moved on, if not for the geometry. All 3 discharges in class flare, an eastward blast, a northern lob lined up along a vector nobody could ignore. The line did not point toward Earth. It did not point at a planet we argue about. It pointed along the path of an interstellar visitor, a retrograde stranger on a long loop we were still learning to pronounce, Atlas. Atlas had been in our ephemerides for months. Unbound by our sun in the theological sense, bound by it in the practical mood of celestial mechanics. A body from the outside, cruising against the traffic toward an October perihelion, its trajectory climbing toward the ecliptic at an angle so neat you would wince seeing it in a textbook, 5 degrees. Clean. Surgical. Wrong, for anyone who preferred randomness to pattern. We could have called it coincidence and gotten away with it. Plenty did. But coincidence is a word we use when we want to sleep. Others didn't sleep. Others put the day's footage next to the day's coordinate charts and felt their knuckles go cold. Energy doesn't care about our categories, said Stephen Burns, a geophysicist who has spent too much of his life staring at the sun and not enough of it believing in peace. It cares about resonances, alignments, the way fields feed other fields. This looks like a dialogue to me. Not a conversation in any language we can translate yet. More like a call and an answer. Or a call and a change of posture. His words drew a line through the room. On one side stood the comfortable, on the other, the curious. The comfortable reminded everyone in patient voices that the sun is a beast of cycles and surprises. That solar cycle 25 had already outpaced expectations. That coronas can twitch 3 times with no narrative at all. The curious pointed a finger at the vector and the clock. They pointed at Atlas. They pointed at a 5-degree climb toward the flat of our system, and at the way the star's tantrums had leaned, quite literally, in the same direction as a visitor we had not invited. If we had never seen Oumuamua in 2017, maybe everyone would have gone to bed. But we had. And some of the people who watched it go by wrote papers that got them mocked before they got them remembered. Interstellar bodies do not always behave like respectable comets. They carry their own baggage. Charged dust. Little skirts of plasma. Magnetic stubbornness. The kinds of traits that make a star cough when an outsider wanders too close to the front door. Harvard did not confer a doctorate on the idea. It did not need to. The idea had a habit of visiting rooms on its own. The timing alone would have put the monitoring agencies on edge. A chain of solar eruptions in a compressed window is reason enough. Each one is a potential threat to more than satellites and glossy dashboards. A coronal mass ejection doesn't know the difference between a weather satellite and a ventilator. It does not hate, but it is not your friend. It drapes our world in charged particles and then watches to see which of our wires are tidy and which of our wires have been allowed to fray. When the wires are grids, the fraying has consequences with names we say softly: outage, blackout, failure. Stack beneath this the speculation that Atlas might be more than a passerby. That the sun may be sensitive in ways that embarrass our models. That objects in the deep, arriving from directions we do not expect, can pinch, pull, or lift the star's field. Stack beneath that the fact that our predictive algorithms still label too many solar events unforeseen. In official reports, that's the box you check when you don't want to say we missed it, but you also don't want to lie. Between 2019 and 2024, nearly a third of significant eruptions, by the agency's own accounting, came from the blind spot. It doesn't mean we're ignorant. It means there are variables outside the frame. It means the orchestra has instruments we cannot hear yet. While those magnetic lines were breaking and bending on the star, the air over warm water changed its mind. A cluster of disturbed clouds that had no obligations to anyone tightened itself into an eye. The wind braided itself into a speed that gave names to news anchors and made towns weigh sandbags that weren't heavy enough. 25 hours after the first advisory, the storm had climbed a ladder that usually takes it days. They called it Erin. Category 5. Almost perfect symmetry in satellite photographs. A whirl so classical that it made researchers gasp before they remembered to be afraid. Burns looked at the storm and saw a small rug woven with the same thread as the big one. Not because the sun caused the storm. Not because climate is a puppet and space its master. Because the cosmos enjoys rhythm. Because the same math runs through plasma loops and hurricanes. Because macro and micro make faces at each other when we're not watching, and sometimes they don't bother to stop when we are. In the same week, Japan's active volcano Sakurajima had its night turn to day. A fireball cut the sky open over the caldera with the rude confidence of a stranger at a funeral. The International Meteor Organization said the light was as bright as a full moon. It was a rock, yes.
A visitor, sure. A coincidence, perhaps.
But each time the heavens shout above a place that already burns from below, the old human habit wakes up. We look for patterns. We write them into stories as quickly as we can. Sometimes that is a mistake. Sometimes we are catching up to a truth that is bored of waiting for us. Scientists have a name for our hunger for shape and noise: apophenia.
We can't turn it off.
We shouldn't try. The work is to aim it carefully and test it mercilessly. If we are going to wonder whether external disturbances touch internal processes, we should put the wondering where the data live. In 2021, a paper in Nature Geoscience examined days of high geomagnetic impact and found that the Earth is more likely to loosen tectonic energy under those conditions. It stopped short of waving causation around like a flag.
It kept its tone clean.
But correlation had put its hand up. Later, in 2015, a study in Geophysical Research Letters sifted 4 decades of records and found an uptick in volcanic eruptions around the Pacific Ring of Fire when solar activity peaked. The proposed mechanism was not magic. It was the plausible effect of a vibrating magnetic field on stress in rock and melt. Was this proof?
No.
Was it irresponsible to ignore?
No. Is it dangerous to ignore forever? Tat the edge we live on now. Go smaller.
Schumann resonances, the low, steady electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet slid and wobbled during some of the solar storms, according to the National Institute of Polar Research in Japan. Earth's cavity, squeezed between ground and ionosphere, took the beat from above and let it shift the rhythm below. We have always suspected that biology listens to that rhythm. Not in the cartoon way. In the quiet way that biorhythms sometimes follow the drum they were born under. If Atlas's flyby amplifies the disturbance, we might see not only power grids but sleep cycles quiver. That does not make the sky a god. It makes the sky the environment. It means we are not an island.
We never were.
This is the part where the room splits again. The cautious ask for more years, more events, more patience. The impatient demand action, because outages do not wait for peer review. Meanwhile, regular people living regular lives notice the simple things. Phone screens freeze for a heartbeat during the worst of a storm. Videos of the moment collect millions of views and 1,000 absurd conclusions. The European Space Agency puts out a sober bulletin about GPS jitter during a flare. 3 reporters pick it up, write it cleanly, and watch their words disappear under the avalanche of a hashtag that promises more doom with less nuance. Traders who coordinate with nanosecond precision nurse coffee and remind each other that their algorithms rest on clocks in space. When time from the sky stutters, markets can and have tripped over their own feet. Most portfolio managers still don't include solar weather in their risk memos.
They will. Slowly.
After someone expensive makes a mistake. The pieces keep falling onto the table, like puzzle bits from a box you were told belonged to another game. The sustained coronal hole that has sent us high-speed solar wind for 12 rotations already. The days when large earthquakes clustered near planetary alignments as if geometry is more than ornament. The memory of Quebec 1989, when a solar storm tipped a grid into darkness and reminded everyone that a transformer is a delicate thing. The near miss in 2012 when a massive coronal ejection took a path we were lucky not to be standing in. The old family of sun-grazing Kreutz comets and the way they've been stitched into papers that whisper about their influence on coronal behavior without daring to shout. And now Atlas, that retrograde outsider, riding a strategic trajectory in the sense only celestial mechanics can make innocent.
October 1st, a close brush with Mars.
October 22nd, upper conjunction with the Sun. October 31st, perihelion. You couldn't design a calendar more likely to rattle nerves if you tried. August, in retrospect, was the overture. Back on the star, the August 20th eruptions were not only dramatic.
They were precise.
NASA's own models projected one of the ejections straight through the region of space where Atlas would be. As if the Sun had turned its head to look.
As if.
That 2-word phrase will carry us for months.
As if. As if.
The conservative astrophysicists, those who build careers on skepticism because skepticism is the only machine that robustly prints truth, call this sequence a coincidence. The others, including a Harvard contrarian with a taste for interstellar arguments, point out that every time these outsiders swing through, our star behaves with more theater than the baseline can explain. The argument is not about belief. It is about budgets and attention. Do we pretend the network is closed, because closed systems are easier to compute, or admit that open systems make messy, beautiful music? A plasma physicist named Donald Scott argued long before Twitter loved him that Birkeland currents thread space like nerve fibers, that invisible rivers of charge connect bodies we've been taught to model only as masses. We have proof in small places. Io feeds Jupiter with currents bright enough to see. Saturn's rings hum with electricity as much as they fall in gravity. If these connections exist locally, is it audacity to wonder if an interstellar object can tug at a star's magnetism as it moves through our deck of fields?
It might be.
It might also be an idea whose time has arrived unfashionably early, the way so many of tomorrow's textbooks arrive. There is a sick comfort in dismissing what you cannot quantify. There is also the kind of courage that Nobel addresses are written about later, the courage to say out loud, we have a pattern and no mechanism. We need a mechanism. We need the funding and the patience to look for one. We need to give ourselves permission to write unknown external driver in the margins without feeling like heretics. Meanwhile, here on the ground, people have questions that have nothing to do with magnetohydrodynamics. Do I unplug the servers when the KP index spikes? Do I gas up the car? Do I go to work if the GPS won't? Do I keep a flashlight in a drawer, even though I live in a city that scolds me for my primitive paranoia? The science can speak in probabilities. Life demands a yes or a no. The hardest thing we will ask of each other in the coming weeks is to make good bets without pretending they are guarantees. There is danger here, not only in the sky but in the way we look at each other. Our civilization is built on the comforting lie of control. We frame storms as failures of local government or failures of will. We treat the grid as a solved problem because it mostly works. We muse about space like children behind glass at an aquarium. When a rock lights the sky and a volcano grumbles and a storm becomes a monster overnight and a star throws an unplanned fist and an interstellar thing leans its way into the narrative, the glass feels thin. If cosmic inputs can shift the mood of our star and our atmosphere and our social machines, then the fiction of isolation is gone. For some, that recognition will become a story about gods. For others, a story about codes. For others still, a story about an ecology finally big enough to be honest. You don't have to like all three. You do have to admit that people act in accordance with the stories that work on them. That means we will see groups who prepare and groups who pray and people who will manage to do both, with a kind of grace you only see when the old map is ripping. A different kind of scientist will roll a different kind of data across a table and point to a different kind of calendar. The U.S. Geological Survey's 2020 synthesis stopped well short of causal claims, but it did not blush when it noted that the biggest earthquakes, those root events above magnitude 8, bunched more than expected during periods of high solar activity and certain alignments. The press did not print it on page 1. They rarely do when a claim threatens the industry that funds their ads. The numbers remained patient as stone. Elsewhere, long-lived coronal holes sent long-lived rivers of wind that matched, unpleasantly well, timing of global seismic waves.
Myanmar on March 29th.
The Mid-Pacific on July 29, 2025. Dates that sit on charts like thumbtacks and make you mutter when you trace your finger from one to the other. We pretend not to be superstitious. Then we watch a fireball bloom over a volcano and half of us think omen, before we remember second-order effects and predictive text.
We breathe.
We return to the desk. We open papers. We note that on some days, the earth itself hums differently because the sky has changed its pitch.
We can be both.
We can be animals and analysts in the same hour. The elegance and the terror of the next months is that they are a test for every story at once. As Atlas kisses Mars on October 1st, as it disappears behind the sun on the 22nd, as it dives close on Halloween, watch the star. Watch the grids. Watch the quiet metrics we don't celebrate, the Schumann baseline, the HF bands, the error budgets in GPS time, the automatic adjustments in trading systems, the differential drifts in ring laser gyroscopes that are supposed to stay bored.
Watch storms. Watch volcanoes. Watch ho wie behave. If it's all coincidence, the diligence won't kill us.
If it isn't, the diligence will save us. That is not mystical. That is logistics. Meanwhile, 1,000 small labs are sifting. A team in Japan catalogs tiny shifts in resonance, looking for the fingerprint of solar input in the planet's own heartbeat. A group in Italy, soft-spoken and argumentative in the way Italians are when they care too much, runs a cross-correlation between kindices and hospital admissions for arrhythmias. A woman in Sao Paulo installs a cheap magnetometer on her balcony and finds that the $10 hack can still tell a story if you let it. Amateur radio operators, those stubborn monks of the ether, log their bands like birds, and you can almost feel the sun through their collective diary. If Atlas acts like a conductor at any point, they'll be the first to sense the baton. It's not just sensors. It's habits. A city council that ignored resilience as a buzzword last year now votes to buy spare transformers because an engineer wrote a memo that sounded like a prayer. A hospital invests in Faraday cages because someone in procurement remembered Quebec '89 when the lights went soft and the alarms went loud. A school district runs a drill that begins with a phrase nobody used a decade ago: space weather alert. This isn't panic. Panic is flailing.
This is posture.
Posture is how you choose to be when the ground moves. The most aggressive claim you can make without lying is easy enough to put in one sentence.
The sun is active.
Atlas is arriving. The way they lean into each other already shows up in our instruments and our lives. Denying it because we lack a polished mechanism is not scholarship. It's superstition in a lab coat. But then comes the humility. The currents tying together worlds, if they exist, are not the cables in your wall. They are filaments in a plasma sea. They are probabilities braided by fields. The act of saying dialogue is itself a metaphor, a way to dress a fact in a coat our ears like. The reality, if we find it, will be both simpler and more complicated than a conversation. There will be nothing human about it, and at the same time it will be the human thing. Rhythm, alignment, the way a system relaxes or tenses when something it doesn't own moves nearby. There is a worse mistake than being wrong. It is being too proud to find out.
So we build.
We design missions that stare at the star in ways nobody paid for before. We push Parker Solar Probe-style orbits while we still have the institutional attention to do it. We iron out the politics that make data proprietary in a crisis. We expand the space weather offices from afterthought to front desk. We treat Schumann monitoring as public health, not a hobby for ionospheric romantics. We publish our null results before rumor writes the script without us. We also talk differently. We retire the phrase 100-year storm from polite conversation because it is a lie we tell to protect budgets, not people. We stop pretending that exponential storm intensification was unthinkable. We stop training our kids to find comfort only in the sentence it's not connected, and teach them to survive the scarier, truer sentence: it is connected, but we don't understand it yet. We keep the skepticism. We keep the satire for charlatans who smell like profit. We keep the quiet voice that says, don't overfit. We put that voice in the same room as the one that says, don't underprepare. We tell them to marry, to argue in the kitchen, to raise children with better questions than ours. Between now and Halloween, the calendar is heavy. The conjunctions are stacked. If you are the kind of person who keeps a notebook, you might write them down on the inside cover and look back later and either laugh at yourself or shake your head at your younger caution. Either way is an honest life. There is a scene that has already repeated itself often enough to count as a genre.
A finance floor.
Screens with data that pretend to be facts.
A teeny stutter.
A set of trades that went a millisecond late and cost someone more than you will make in 10 years. The postmortem invokes satellite time and the insulted pride of machines that missed a beat for reasons the vendor calls exogenous. That's a coward's word for from the sky. On the other side of the world, a farmer wonders why the pivot didn't pivot when the meter said it should.
Exogenous. The sky again.
The word makes us feel better until we are ready to say sun without superstition.
Another scene.
A family in Kagoshima steps outside because the neighbors shouted. The night looks like noon for 5 seconds, then flees back to black. The volcano does what volcanoes do, nothing you can trust. The kids laugh because kids laugh in defense and offense both. The mother wraps an arm around shoulders that are not trembling and whispers a story about dragons. Later in bed, she scrolls. She reads about meteors and magnetism and plasma and winds. She falls asleep between dread and awe. She will live there for a while.
Most of us will. One more.
A room at NASA where a senior engineer who hates adjectives almost reaches for one. He points to a plot of unforeseen events, the line that nobody celebrates, trending up. He clears his throat. He does not say mystery. He says unmodeled drivers. He proposes a program with a price tag that would have gotten him laughed out of the building 5 years ago.
Nobody laughs now.
They don't approve it that day. They remember it. That, for now, is progress. The sharpest argument against pretending is history. The Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004 sent instruments humming hours before the water struck villages that had no sirens. Katrina in 2005 was predicted like a holiday nobody set the table for. These wounds should teach us one thing, if nothing else: the signal was not missing.
We were. Our attention was elsewhere.
We confuse quiet with safe.
We mistake slow with gentle.
We think a system cares about our schedules.
The sun does not.
The interstellar does not. Atlas is not a villain. It is a rock singing a part in a choir we forgot to score. You ask, what can I do that is not melodrama? The answer is so boring it feels brave. Know your grid. Ask your city where its transformers come from and how many spares it has. Charge your stuff when storms are forecast, not because apocalypse, but because your fridge likes food. If you run a hospital, buy a cage made of copper. If you run a newsroom, learn the word KP, and use it in a sentence that does not sound like a spell. If you teach, make a poster that shows the sun, earth, and the thin line of life being patient under a hail of protons.
Don't scare your students. Respect them.
Give them numbers and a story that is large enough to be real. If you are in policy, stop thinking of space weather as a space thing. It is an agriculture thing.
A finance thing. A hospital thing. A traffic thing. A life thing.
Fund it like it is everything because, intermittently and without apology, it is. If you are a scientist, aim your skepticism where it belongs, at sloppy thinking, not at new thinking. When someone says Birkeland current, and you taste YouTube in your mouth, rinse it out and go back to the literature. When someone says resonance, and you feel the urge to say woo, count to 10 and ask for the math. When someone says unforeseen, don't punish them. Thank them for telling the truth. If you are a poet, you have the easiest job and the hardest. You have to make sure we keep falling in love with the sky while we grow up about it. You have to make room in sentences for both fear and readiness. You have to keep us from treating preparation as a betrayal of optimism. The endgame here is not a clean answer because there isn't one yet. The endgame is an honest posture in a universe that may be more interactive than we were trained to tolerate. A posture that says, we are not at the mercy of gods. We are at the mercy of physics. We don't know all the physics.
We can learn.
That learning is policy, budget, practice, power, song. It lives in rooms with screens and in houses with candles. Between sun and rock and storm and grid, between coincidence and correlation, between story and equation, there is a tiny bridge built of nothing but attention. We can stand on it together without falling if we stop pretending that we were ever alone on an island. We were never an island.
We are a node.
A node in a network of resonances that laugh at our borders. A node responsible for its own stability and for the stability of the lines that pass through. Atlas will swing, and like everything else, it will go. The sun will keep its own calendar and ignore ours. The storms will come before they are ready to be named. The volcanoes will teach patience in the cruel way they prefer.
The grids will hum.
The instruments will blink. The children will ask better questions than we did. Remember this when someone tells you that preparation is panic or that curiosity is chaos. Remember that silence can be complicity. Remember that to treat the cosmos as a closed book is a luxury we cannot afford, now that the margins are crowded with notes that are not ours. It is not fatalism to say, the sky has a say. It is not alarmism to ask, how will we answer? Start, then, with small things. Replace a sentence in your head. Stop saying the sun did this to us. Start saying the sun did what the sun does.
We learned.
Replace a reflex. When someone shows you a chart with a rising line of unforeseen events, don't accuse. Ask what we need to see that line coming. Replace a fear. Swap we control nothing for we influence what we can. The difference is the distance between despair and discipline. You live in an era when a phone can tell you when auroras will lick your latitude and when a probe dives into the corona of your star and returns. You live in a system that can shift mood in hours because a body we didn't even know about a century ago is now a character on our stage. You live in a culture that will either learn to treat that stage with respect or will mistake the applause for the show.
If this sounds like a sermon, forgive me.
It's only that the data now feel like scripture in the oldest sense, not commands but invitations. Not laws but guidance. Not dogma, but stories large enough to hold us. The last thing worth saying is simple. The loudest illusion of our species is not that we're exceptional. It is that we are isolated.
We are not.
We are entangled. We are participants in a dialogue that needs no words. The sun spoke on August 20, 2025. Something from elsewhere drew near.
The fields bent. The storms learned. The phones flickered.
The volcano flared under a lit sky.
The markets hiccuped.
The magnetometers drew strange handwriting across their paper.
We noticed.
That noticing is the beginning of responsibility. What comes next is not doom.
It is a choice.
Between action and ignoring. Between humility and bravado. Between a civilization that treats cosmic signals as noise and a civilization that treats them as weather. Choose as if the lights in your city depend on it. Choose as if your grandmother's insulin depends on it. Choose as if your child's sleep depends on it. Because in ways small and enormous, they do. When Halloween comes and Atlas swings tight around the old fire, we will either stand with candles we already own and plans we've already practiced, or we will curse a sky that owes us nothing. The geometry will not change to soothe us. The physics will not apologize. The only thing that can change in time is us. And if you need an image to hold while you decide, take this one. A row of magnetometers in a snow-loud Arctic night. Their needles quiver. A room full of screens in Maryland, the light too blue for sanity. A child in Kagoshima, awake after the fireball, counting her heartbeats against a house that hums a little faster than yesterday. A storm over water forming an eye that looks, for a moment, like the pupil of a god you don't believe in. A rock from nowhere threading a path that can be graphed and yet still feels like a story.
Listen. Not for voices. For patterns. For resonance.
For the kind of invitation that physics makes when it wants you to be bigger than your fear. We will not pass this way again in exactly this way. We will always pass some way. The calendar is not a trap.
It is a map. August was a page.
October is another. Write notes in the margins. Draw your own arrows.
Charge your battery. Call your grandmother.
Speak to your city. Build your cage.
Share your plots.
Teach your students to love the sun enough to measure it, and to love the earth enough to keep it steady in a wind. The dialogue will continue whether we love it or not.
Better, then, to love it.
Better, then, to become the kind of species that can live inside a network of forces and call it home, not horror. Better, then, to let the old illusions burn away under a sky bright enough to write by, and to finally say the line that was always waiting for our mouths. We are not alone. We are connected. And being connected is not a curse. It is a responsibility that feels, in the right light, like grace.